I want to talk to you about societies.io. Let me pull it up and then I'll start. So I found this company on X and it caught my attention for a couple of different reasons. One of the reasons is it's a very bold idea. And also it sort of links back to a couple of things that we saw emerge during the early days of LLMs where there was research, but no one had ever built like a product around it. So what is it? Basically, this is a product that it lets you create virtual AI personas and you can run content specific experiments. So it's for content people and marketing people like me, specific experiments against those virtual audiences. The benefit of that is basically this is like the next stage of the world of, say, digital experimentation. You know, we're always taught to like do A/B tests and like test everything that you can to make sure that what you're putting out into the world is as efficient and effective as possible. Validate because you can, right? This takes it to the next level, which is like, I'm going to validate with a virtual community of people that's structured in a way that matches my audience to validate ahead of time and optimize before a message even hits anyone. Which is interesting because then you can take it to the next step and think you can virtually test anything, which generates some pretty interesting social questions. It's like, well, how much, there's a lot of manipulation in that. Like, what about politics? Or like, there's a lot of stuff where like it takes a lot of the risk out of anything when you can virtually validate things. Now, all of that being said, it's pretty exciting and interesting. So what I want to do is I want to take you through an example and I'll show you how it works. And then I want to show you, basically, I tried to use Claude 4.1 to try and recreate a version of this to see how hard it would be. Cool. Let's jump in. So here is the app. All right, so this is an example. These guys had a couple of iterations on their product, they said, but this is kind of like the one that they landed on. And interestingly, they actually used the product to try and validate whether the startup idea was good. And so their examples are always related to like startup investors, saying, would startup investors invest in a company that does this? Which I think is pretty funny. It's very meta.
So do they provide the data sets for stuff like that? Like what's the core of their technology? Is it a combination of the data sets and their algorithms or code, or are they?
Yeah, so I'll start with what it is. It is basically an LLM powered virtual database of potential personas of people, right? So it's built, they don't have any proprietary models. It's built on top of Claude, I think probably ChatGPT 5, they'll build it on top of that, right? So it's actually not, it's the kind of software app that's only possible now that we have access to foundation models, but it's not a fundamental innovation on the kind of the model layer, for example. And it's in the category of, basically it's in the category of, I think it's like agent simulation platforms, or like a simulation platform. And there's quite a few of these. This is just one that I found, right? Then the way that it actually functions is they have this persona creation kind of process. You can then connect your personal social accounts, or you can just create completely virtual ones. You just click it and basically you just go, yeah, it's just a prompt. You just add in a prompt and say, look, this is the kind of person that I'm looking to communicate with. Or what I did was actually I put one of our videos, YouTube videos in, and I said, this is a video that I've created. Can you create an audience based on what I talked about? And then it will generate a bunch of those personas in the background, which is effectively, we can't peer under the hood, but I'm assuming that is just a bunch of prompt engineering, right? And then they represent that as a virtualized kind of node network of different people. So this is the AI enthusiast group that's related to our podcast. And then it gives you a sense of like, all right, this is an associate machine learning scientist, virtual machine learning scientist. This is a senior AI engineer. And then they also try to use data from how ideas spread to virtually represent kind of nodes in a social graph. So when certain messages hit people, how likely are they to share it? How likely are they to talk about it? And how does that affect your distribution of different messages within a virtualized network and a virtualized group? And then they also have a couple of different countries that they're virtualizing as well. So these kinds of people in India, Canada, etc. You with me so far?
Yeah, this is crazy. I don't know. I don't consider myself a doomer, but like that's where the first things that come to mind are all the bad things that could happen. So maybe I am. I don't know, but
Well, we'll check in on Skynet a little bit later. But like this, basically, what you can then do is, um, sorry, before I mention this around like the actual core, which is basically this simulation engine. So you've got this, and then there's a simulation engine where you push messages into this network. They do have some example like results on the website, and then they claim that they outperform foundation models just based on this kind of graph architecture and then this simulation engine that they have. But interestingly, and that their methodology you can check, but basically they had a bunch of like testing against a human and then testing against basically their algorithm and then the basic LLMs to say, if I shared this post with this kind of person, how would it perform in terms of like its shareability, its audience reach, those sorts of things. And then their engine outperformed both humans and the core foundation models in prediction across a blind test of a bunch of LinkedIn posts and then how those posts actually performed. So that's how they're trying to build their kind of story. It's not completely validated, like this is very new, but that's how they kind of think about it. When you actually start
can you
to,
do the evaluations on your side? Like if you do a simulation, you say this is the campaign that I want to go with or whatever, and then measure how that actually went and then do like
do your
iterative
own.
evaluations or something like that. Can you do that on your side?
That's interesting. Well, I was just going to start validating it. So once I did this, I was going to share it, create the thing, and then we can do like a post analysis. I don't know if then when you start sharing it, this ingests that information and gets smarter about your actual performance, which is interesting because the next thing I'll show you, this is a virtual society, right? The AI enthusiasts, these are virtual people. Whereas when I go into the other area where I've actually connected my LinkedIn, you see real people, like, and it tries to give you an estimate of like how they will actually respond to your content.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go through the process. Like you can say, all right, I want to create a new test. And then you've got this like these examples here. They're mostly social posts or like just content creation, that sort of stuff, email subject lines or emails. I did an example of this, or I might just I'll do a fresh one so we can see what it's like. Article, GPT-5.
AI is a fad.
Not enough flops for my liking.
You know what's sorry, a side tangent here on the build thing that we built where it pulls our transcripts and summarizes. It's funny, like I say more sarcastic things than I thought because reading through that, sometimes it'll reinterpret like some smartass thing I said, and then I'm like, well, now it
Now it
looks
looks
like I
like
have an
I'm just a
opinion that
massive
I actually
asshole.
don't. I was just joking. Yeah.
All right, here we go. So they've got this chat interface where you can like get it to optimize and get it to basically craft an example for you, which is helpful for this. Here's an article, and then you can launch the simulation, and it basically says, all right, we're distributing your message. Let's see what it's like. While it's doing that, I'll just show you the open source examples that I was doing. So I put in this one, which is an article about unleashing the GPT open source model, blah, 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 very, very specific to our audience, something that, we probably would write. That's the original. And then you can see up here, they give you this score, which is like, all right, that had a very high attention score into this audience as a simulation. And then it tries to give you an assessment of like what's partial attention, all of those sorts of things. And then it gives you insights as well, and you can ask follow-ups, which is kind of interesting. And then they try and give you conversation responses based on a simulation of how those kinds of personas would respond. So like this kind of conversation simulation. And what I really want to see is like how they actually kind of drive this in and what the prompts are. Then it tries to give you advice to say, right, well, what did they actually like about it? You know, how could you create better versions of this based on a simulation of people's responses? So 60% of the thoughts indicate a strong desire for code snippets and architectural diagrams. If you don't have that, then obviously put those in, and then you would do that and then reiterate, and then potentially you could retest again. What I thought was really cool is you can then iterate on it. So if I go back to our article here, so obviously that would be a pretty provocative thing to do, and it's obviously probably not going to be true, but you can then iterate on this. You can ask for follow-ups. You can also see, all right, well, show me how it performed across individual markets. So you can just basically ask the AI and give you breakdowns. For example, in my test, I was saying, all right, well, show me how the performance of this content varies by role type. How does it change between AI engineers versus, senior machine learning engineers and that sort of stuff? So you can actually benchmark your sub personas within this total audience and by country. And then even they've got this really cool thing where you click on one node, you can see, all right, well, this senior machine learning engineer read it in part as an estimate based on the performance. And then you can actually chat with a virtual version of that engineer. And I was like, why didn't you read the whole article? So you can run like little content tests against each node in the network. All right, and the response is, honestly, I usually just skim the first bit to see if it's got real substance or if it's just more than hype. I'm always looking for those true flops, the actual impact, not just bigger than a chatbot. All right, cool. So you could use that potentially to optimize, say, your opener and that sort of stuff. So that's the virtual society, and you can create multiple ones. And then you can connect your personal LinkedIn and Twitter, X. And in this case, this is my LinkedIn graph, right? And I can see people that I'm connected to and my interaction patterns with them. So I'll use this as an example. So Marlene she's one of the LangChain ambassadors. She works for Microsoft as a developer advocate. And then I can start a conversation with her as a virtual version of her that's been represented through this graph. So what I did was I had this this is an article that a video that we put out, right, which is this VO JSON, kind of using JSON kind of structures with VO, the video generation model. And it created, so this is the original here, and I can see the number of reactions, and then it created different variants for me, and it benchmarked those reactions, that variant here. And then I can see, so if I go back to Marlene, I can see that she read it in part, and then I can ask her a follow-up, say, why or what didn't you like about this? And it virtualizes her responses. Now, I'm really interested to know how they do that. Do they go and look at her content to try and estimate, based on what she interacts with and what she likes?
I would imagine they're just a bunch of personas, right? I don't know how much you know about the Cambridge Analytica thing, and not to be negative or anything. I guess they did or didn't do that, depending on who you ask, I think. Years and years ago, but that's pretty much the same thing, right? These are just personas. So it might not be exactly like a replica of Tom, but it's it knows enough about you from these little bits and pieces to understand generally what your persona is, right?
Well, you're 100% right. So Meta, Google, LinkedIn probably as well, definitely, Google via YouTube. They build these personas up and an understanding of what you are, and then advertisers target you, right? But usually that's behind the scenes. So all of these tools, they give you predictive elements around ads you're putting into those platforms. But I've never been able to use this as someone who just wants to put a blog post out, right? I kind of like it because it's kind of fighting against what you're saying. Like I was always at the point of like, all right, if I want to get that benefit, I have to pay the fee. This is like a version of that I can use where I can distribute emails. No one's taxing
Yeah.
me. There's no email tax on SMTP. I can put something out of a HTTP in a blog post. There's no tax on that, right? I own those channels, but I can use this mechanism. So
Hmm.
that's why I think it's significant.
Well,
And
yeah, totally.
I reckon you could, like, if they had a bit of data and they could scrub information around like what she likes, what she's into, what she looks at, what she reacts to, they could potentially build a virtualized version of these nodes in your own network. So these are different contacts of mine from Australia. You know, these
From that perspective, I absolutely
in the
love
US.
this idea because I've said for like 10 years, hey, if Google provided me all the information that they have on me and allowed, I could load it into different business analytics tools and use it like this, then maybe I'm more willing to share my information. But to this point, it's like all these big providers, they have these capabilities, absolutely, and they have for a long time. But I think if we're sharing, like, let us use it too. That's what I've always said. So this is a step in that direction. I think that's great.
Well, and that's what the open source social media kind of stack movement was all about, right? So Mastodon, I think, is what it's called, and I think Blue Sky is built on that. Um, the whole idea is that it should be portable, like it should be forkable, like you should be able to access it.
You know what they're using on the back end? Like, is this Neo4j or a different?
I don't exactly know because they haven't shared that information, but I started looking around. So what I did after this was I was like, all right, how would you build something like this? And a couple of the platforms, there are a couple of platforms out there specifically for this that are part of I guess, the Python research kind of community, primarily these core Python packages. And then you would need to plug in something to do this kind of like graph structure, right? Which is the perfect application for Neo4j. So I would be amazed if they weren't using Neo.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like it.
Yeah. Well, then there's visualizations of those concepts as well. So I don't know if it's exactly the same. A couple of the key, so I went through a couple of the old key research papers that came out. The biggest one back in the day was this one, which is, do you remember this? It caused a bit of a stir when it came out. Do you remember this one? This interactive simulacra of human behavior. Basically, it's kind of older, 2023. And it was the first one that I saw anyway of sort of like, what are these virtual environments? And it was all just sort of like toys. They were kind of like just building games. And the version of it that I think I saw from the A16Z guys was this, which is like this virtual kind of town thing. And then there's a bunch of these just little agents wandering around and you can get them to interact with each other. A lot of them, the examples were like games. So I kind of ignored it because I'm like, oh, I'm not really into gaming. Like, that's really cool. Like, NPCs and stuff that can talk properly and have real, personas. But I never really kind of made the leap to a really solid kind of business application like these guys obviously did. So there's a couple of those. I'll put the rest of them in the
Do you
show notes.
see, do you see, do you know enough about the Genie 3? Like, are these pretty closely related? Because from what I understand, Genie 3 is like virtual, like metaverse, I guess, like virtual environments. Then do you see running simulations in these virtual environments within that, like containerized metaverse space? Or I'm just butchering the lingo, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
I do sort of.
Or like,
no,
are they related in your mind?
the things I'm going to show you are actually way simpler than that. So the number one application of this simulation environment, there's a really great talk from, I think he's like the head of AI at NVIDIA, talks about this a lot. I'll put it in the show notes. It was at the Sequoia AI Day recently, and he basically talks about how, like, if you want to get like a learning environment and a data input kind of vector for robots and robotic learning from the human form, it's really, really hard to get enough data. Like you have to basically strap a VR headset to someone and then hook it up to a robot's fingers, and then basically just pick up shit and wander around and like look at things and like, you know, turn off a light, whatever it is. And so he basically said, look, we just can't scale that. So we have to put all these things into a virtualized environment. But the virtualized environments he's describing are like 10,000 hands twiddling at, you know, a pen or whatever, robot hands, and basically building these robotic and kind of learning environments in a virtualized world. The next step for something like that Genie model is that, where you put these virtualized kind of reflective, like physics, real world physics compatible kind of agent or elements into an environment like that to learn. And apparently that's what's been happening in automated driving algorithms for a very long time. They'll put them in, like, there's some like hilarious headlines where they put them into like Grand Theft Auto games and stuff just to get them to learn how to drive. But this is way simpler than that. And I think it's accessible for a lot of developers, which is why I think it's cool, which is like, actually, so this is an example of like a research package that can be used to build these things called agents.jl. There's another one called Mesa, which is another one. And basically it's these packages give you a structure to virtualize kind of an agent interaction environment around some sort of concept, whether it's like an economics concept or like social interactions or birds flocking, whatever it is, in a very simplified way. It's not like 3D environments, totally chaotic, like a robotics thing. It's like, well, here are my dimensions. This is a more constrained environment, kind of like a social media distribution graph. It's a more constrained concept, right? These packages and these things are open source packages you can use. So, for example, in the Mensa version, I might show you on the agents.jl version. They have a bunch of these cool little examples you can spin through. Yeah, the flocking model in here. You can see it's kind of like this, like basically trying to emulate what's a seemingly random environment that's very complicated to the visual eye to try and understand how birds might flock together. You can see the time. And then, but the actual way that it's kind of defined is just Python functions in here. Bird speed, all of these things. And this is how you would do it, because you could build using LLMs in an agentic app like LangChain. You could then virtualize or model the way people may share content, may discuss things, may discuss ideas, all of those sorts of things, to try and model like a distribution graph through a social network using very simple kind of functions. So I think this is sort of, I don't exactly know, but I think this is how it's built. The question underneath that is like, how do they model, like I was saying before, like how do they model an actual person and how they think an actual person will behave as opposed to a persona? Because a persona is like, all right, someone who is like Tom and Cameron is more likely to do this when you share that article. But if I share an article, because I think this is where it's going based on this little graph that I showed you here in Artificial Societies. If I share an article and I want Tomaz Tungus to share it, he's one of my connections, but he's like super influential, then that's really valuable to me. If I'm like a startup founder trying to get a bit of traction, right? If he reads it and then he shares it, like that's like so much more valuable than anyone in my network, right?
Mm-hmm.
Building an algorithm to try and understand that is very valuable. But I don't know if they are doing that, if they have done it, if anyone's doing that, right? That's super interesting and, again, a bit doomerish. The other factor is social networks like LinkedIn, right? They're a social graph, same with Facebook, but they're not an interest graph. So you can actually share, like if you go to basically a target society, right? And AI enthusiasts, we could run a test on something like TikTok. And TikTok is just an interest graph. All it is the algorithm is just based on what you watch and a reinforcement kind of feedback loop around where you spend your time. So on that basis,
it's a recommendation engine, basically.
It's not necessarily a recommendation. Well, it is a recommendation engine in terms of what comes up in your feed next, but apparently the secret sauce is more about like dwell time, interest. It has nothing to do with who you're connected to. It has nothing to do with anything other than just seconds on a video, pretty much. And then the process of learning about that and then seeding these things into you. And again, that's an algorithm that's completely opaque. Like no one knows how that works. But things like this could be used to decompose that and try and break it apart and try and understand it more effectively. Yeah, I recommend playing with it, seeing what it's like.